He was a Navy SEAL who walked away from war until it came back for him. When a group of thugs beat his retired K-9 and left him for dead, they didn't just hurt a dog, they woke something they could never control. In the frozen silence of Frost Valley, one man will rise again, not for revenge, but for redemption. Because sometimes God's miracles are born from pain, and the fiercest battles are fought in the soul. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The winter sky above Frost Valley, Colorado, hung like a sheet of steel, colorless and heavy, pressing down on the pine ridges that stood like frozen sentinels against the wind. The snow whispered in drifts across the long, narrow road, and each gust felt like the breath of a mountain remembering too many secrets. Ethan Hale drove his old military-issued pickup slowly through the white curtain, gloved hands steady on the wheel. The road was barely visible beneath the ice, but he knew the way by memory now. After 6 months of isolation, every bend, every twisted tree felt like a silent comrade. He had come to this valley to bury the part of himself that refused to die. The soldier, the hunter, the man who could sleep through gunfire but woke shaking from dreams of silence. Ethan was 36, his face the kind that carried history instead of age. A sharp jawline dusted with a short beard, hair cropped close in military precision, the gray just beginning to appear at the temples. His skin, once tanned by desert suns, was now pale under the mountain chill. The scars along his knuckles and forearms told a story he never shared, one of doors kicked in at midnight, of brothers lost in dust and fire. His blue-gray eyes were watchful even in stillness, a habit carved from years of surviving ambushes where a blink could be a death sentence. He wore his winter tactical uniform, the kind reserved for Navy SEALs operating in frozen terrains. Digital camouflage in muted shades of slate and moss, a tan tactical vest filled with empty ammo pouches, black gloves, and heavy combat boots that crunched softly over the snow. Though he no longer served, the uniform was a second skin, a reminder of who he had been and perhaps still was. The world called him retired. Ethan preferred exiled. Beside him sat Ranger, his German shepherd, a 6-year-old veteran with a coat the color of burnt oak and eyes that glowed amber in the dim light. Ranger had served with Ethan during Operation Nomad, a mission that ended not in victory, but betrayal. A piece of shrapnel still rested in the dog's hind leg, a permanent souvenir of the explosion that killed their unit. The limp that remained was barely noticeable, but Ethan saw it every time the dog moved. It was the kind of wound a soldier recognized, not in the body, but in the soul. When the truck finally stopped before the small log cabin nestled against the mountainside, Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The structure was built of thick pine, its roof buried beneath a blanket of snow, smoke barely curling from the chimney. It wasn't much, but it was his. Bought with the last of his pension, repaired with hands that remembered how to build fortifications. He stepped out into the cold. The wind bit through his layers, but Ethan didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that the elements were nothing compared to the storm inside a man. Ranger leapt down beside him, landing with the fluid grace of a trained operative, nose lifted to the wind. The dog's breath puffed in small clouds, his ears twitching as if he could hear ghosts moving between the trees. "Clear," Ethan murmured with a wry half-smile. Ranger responded with a low chuff, the closest thing to laughter the dog knew. Together, they moved through the snow toward the cabin. Ethan's boots sank deep, each step making a hollow crunch that echoed like memory. Inside, the cabin was sparse but orderly. A wood stove radiated slow warmth, its metal belly glowing faintly. Shelves lined the walls, ammo tins, survival rations, stacks of old books with cracked spines. Against one corner stood a wooden workbench, scattered with tools and rifle parts waiting for repair. Everything here was practical, nothing ornamental. Ethan believed in purpose over beauty. Beauty had been something that died long before his unit did. He hung his vest on a hook and rubbed Ranger's neck. The dog leaned in, eyes closing briefly under the pressure. Ethan knelt, forehead resting lightly against the shepherd's skull. "We're still here, bud," he whispered. "That's got to count for something." The wind rattled the windows as if in answer. Outside, the trees swayed and groaned, their limbs brushing the cabin like cold fingers. It was a sound Ethan had come to love. The wildness of nature, untamed and honest, unlike the men who once gave him orders wrapped in lies. He thought of that day again, the ambush, the radio silence, the sudden realization that the coordinates they'd been given had been a trap. He could still feel the blast wave, the sand tearing through his skin, the ringing in his ears as his team vanished into dust. Ranger had dragged him half-conscious from the wreckage. When command called it a training accident, Ethan had walked away, stripped his insignia, and drove north until the GPS ended. A crunch outside snapped him back. His hand instinctively went to his side, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Ranger's ears perked, body tense. Through the frosted window, a figure approached. An old man, thin but upright, carrying a wooden crate under one arm. Ethan relaxed slightly, but didn't open the door until the man stopped 3 feet away. The stranger removed his cap, revealing snow-white hair and a weathered face drawn tight with years of sun and labor. "Name's Hank Morris," he said, voice rough as gravel but warm with rural courtesy. "Live about a mile east. Figured I'd stop by, welcome the new fella before the next storm traps us all in." Ethan nodded once, silent. Hank smiled faintly. "Don't talk much, do you?" He set the crate down on the porch. Inside were 2 silver-scaled trout packed in snow. "Caught these this morning. Better than anything you'll find in town." "Appreciate it," Ethan replied, his tone calm but guarded. Hank studied him, eyes pale blue and sharp as ice picks. He recognized the stance instantly, the wary, measured posture of a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "You military?" Hank asked finally. "Used to be," Ethan said. Hank's gaze flicked to the uniform, then to Ranger. "So's he, I'm guessing." Ethan smiled without humor. "We both were." A moment of silence passed, filled by the wind and the creaking of the pines. Hank nodded slowly, understanding something unspoken. "Good. The valley could use a few men who know what it means to stand watch. Word of advice, though. Keep your eyes open. The folks down at the development company, they don't take kindly to outsiders who mind their own business." Ethan frowned. "Development company?" Hank's mouth tightened. "Yeah. Rich boy from Denver. Bought half the valley for some resort project. Claims it'll bring jobs. All it's brought so far is strangers, noise, and fences where there used to be freedom." He gave a short, tired laugh. "But hell, maybe I'm just getting old." When he finally left, Ethan stood on the porch long after the man's truck disappeared beyond the trees. The snow began to fall again, slow and deliberate, coating everything in silence. Ranger pressed against his leg, eyes scanning the dark tree line. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's back, his breath misting in the cold air. Peace was what he had come here for. But even peace, he realized, has an expiration date. Somewhere deep in the forest, something unseen moved, a sound too faint for human ears, but not for a dog that had once smelled death in the sand. Ranger's ears twitched, and Ethan's fingers tightened on the railing. The snow kept falling, soft as ash, and the valley swallowed their silence whole. The next morning broke with a thin silver light, the kind that never warmed the earth. Frost clung to the edges of Ethan Hale's cabin windows, forming delicate veins of ice that caught the pale dawn. The night's snowfall had been relentless, burying the old fence Hank Morris had warned him about. Ethan stood on the porch in his winter seal gear, gray-green camouflage dulled by frost, tan vest strapped tight across his chest, breath fogging through the mountain cold. Beside him, Ranger trotted in slow, even steps, his paws sinking deep into the powder, the faint limp in his right leg barely visible. The dog's fur caught the light like wet bronze, his eyes sharp and alive, scanning the horizon as if he expected ghosts to walk out of the snow. Ethan poured a cup of coffee from the metal thermos, the steam rising like incense in the still air. The silence of the forest pressed in, broken only by the rhythmic sound of Ranger's breath and the distant caw of a raven. Peace, he thought, was always just one noise away from breaking. By midday, he decided to make the trip into town. His supplies were running thin: flour, coffee, fuel. The drive down the mountain was slow and deliberate, the truck's tires biting into the frozen mud of Frost Valley Road. The world below unfolded like a forgotten painting, pine forests sagging under white weight, a frozen creek twisting through the hollow, and far in the distance, the clustered rooftops of Aspen Hollow, his reluctant connection to civilization. The town was a picture of quiet decay. Old wooden storefronts leaned into the wind, their paint faded, signs half buried under snow. A few locals moved like shadows, faces wrapped in scarves, eyes wary. Ethan parked outside the general store, its sign creaking faintly. Miller's Supply and Goods. Inside, the air was warm but stale, smelling of coffee grounds, pine soap, and nostalgia. Shelves were stacked high with canned food, rope, kerosene, and boxes of nails. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, stocky but solid, with a thick gray beard and eyes that twinkled despite the weariness in his posture. His name tag read, Gus Miller. "Well, damn," Gus said, voice deep and cracked like firewood. "Haven't seen a new face around here since the pandemic." He grinned, revealing a chipped tooth. "You must be the fella who bought the old cabin up in Frost Ridge." Ethan gave a brief nod. "Just needed some supplies." His voice was calm, even, but carried a weight that made people listen carefully. "Sure thing," Gus said, gesturing to the aisles. "Help yourself. Prices are fairer than Kane's lies, at least." He chuckled at his own joke, but the name made Ethan's attention sharpen. As he moved through the aisles, filling his basket with food and ammunition, the doorbell chimed softly. A woman stepped inside, brushing snow from her long, dark hair. She was in her mid-30s, with a strong, athletic frame wrapped in a dark sheriff's jacket. Her skin was olive-toned, her eyes deep brown and intelligent, the kind that studied before judging. Sheriff Clara Ramirez was the kind of person built from duty. Every movement had precision, every word measured. Years in law enforcement had etched faint lines around her mouth, not from laughter, but from the burden of keeping order in a town that resisted it. She approached the counter, nodding to Gus. "Morning, Gus. You seen the plow truck come through yet?" "Nope," he said. Still waiting. Guess Kane's too busy counting his dollars to pay the county workers on time. At that, she sighed, rubbing her temple. Figures. Then her gaze shifted to Ethan. You must be the one who moved into the Calloway place. Ethan turned, meeting her eyes. Ethan Hale. Clara Ramirez, she replied, not offering her hand. Sheriff, we like quiet up here, Mr. Hale. I hope you do too. I came here for it, he said simply. Her gaze drifted to Ranger, who sat perfectly still near the door, alert but silent. That's a fine-looking shepherd. Trained? Was, Ethan said. Now he's retired. Something flickered in Clara's eyes. Recognition, maybe respect. Retired from what? Same thing I did, Ethan answered. The conversation ended there, words hanging like frost in the air. Before Clara could press further, the door opened again. This time, the temperature seemed to drop with it. A man in an impeccably tailored gray suit entered, his shoes polished black, absurd against the wooden floor streaked with slush. He carried himself like someone who had never been denied anything. Richard Kane. Ethan thought immediately. He didn't need an introduction. The man radiated money, power, and something colder, entitlement. Kane was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with slick dark hair and a face that could charm or wound depending on what he wanted. His smile was smooth, his eyes a pale steel gray, calculating even when pretending warmth. His watch gleamed under the dim store lights, gold against the muted world. Sheriff Ramirez, he said, his voice deep and almost soothing. Always a pleasure. Gus. His nod toward the shopkeeper was curt, perfunctory. Then his gaze landed on Ethan, holding it for a moment too long. And you must be our new mountain man. Ethan Hale, right? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Depends who's asking. Kane chuckled. Fair enough. I'm Richard Kane, owner of Kane Development. We're bringing life back to this valley. New homes, jobs, a ski resort that'll put Aspen to shame. And your property sits right in the middle of my access route. He smiled wider, every tooth gleaming with confidence. I'd like to make you an offer. Not interested, Ethan said. Kane tilted his head, as if speaking to a stubborn child. You haven't even heard it. I don't sell, Ethan replied. His tone was final, but calm, the kind that didn't invite debate. Clara watched the exchange closely, her hand drifting near her belt where her sidearm rested. Gus pretended to clean the counter, his shoulders tense. The atmosphere in the small store thickened, every breath measured. Kane's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes hardened. You're a man of principle. I can respect that, he said softly. But principles don't heat the cabin when the pipes freeze, Mr. Hale. Think about it. He turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. Oh, and Sheriff, do make sure your new friend understands how things work here. We don't want anyone getting hurt. His smile sharpened, then vanished as he stepped back into the snow. When the door shut, the silence returned like a held breath finally released. Friendly guy, Ethan murmured. Rich guy, Gus muttered. Thinks money buys land, people, souls. Clara's gaze lingered on Ethan. You should watch yourself. Men like him don't like hearing no. I've dealt with worse, Ethan said. As she turned to leave, Clara hesitated. You've got the look of someone used to enemies. Just remember, some of them don't wear uniforms anymore. Then she was gone. Outside, the snow had started again, heavier this time, falling in thick, slow flakes that blurred the outlines of the town. Ethan loaded his truck, Ranger climbing silently into the passenger seat. As they drove out of Aspen Hollow, a dark SUV passed them going the opposite direction. Through the tinted glass, Ethan caught the faint glint of eyes watching him. Ranger growled low, the sound deep and primal. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Somewhere behind those dark windows, trouble was already taking notes. The snowstorm swallowed the valley whole. The storm had passed, but the air the next morning still felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Frost Valley shimmered under a cold sun, its trees glittering with frozen light. Ethan Hale stood by the split-rail fence inspecting the damage from the snowfall. His breath made soft clouds, his gloved hands gripping the wood with a soldier's patience. Ranger prowled nearby, head lowered, nose brushing the snow as if following an invisible scent. The German shepherd's fur caught the weak sunlight, streaks of gold flickering through his sable coat. He was uneasy, every muscle alive with warning. Ethan felt it too. The valley was too quiet. Even silence has its rhythm, and this one felt broken. He walked toward the edge of his property, where the forest began to thicken. The snow there was churned up, fresh tire tracks, mud mixed with frost. He crouched, fingers tracing the imprint of knobby treads. Dirt bikes, 3 of them, heading toward his cabin and then back again. He exhaled slowly. So it had started. Ranger's ears twitched, and a low growl rippled through his chest. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "We'll handle it when it comes." But in truth, something deep inside him, the part of him that used to plan ambushes, was already awake. By noon, the valley had brightened to a deceptive calm. The sun hung pale and distant, the air biting like glass. Ethan chopped firewood behind the cabin, each swing deliberate, rhythmic, a ritual of peace he forced himself to believe in. Ranger rested nearby, lying half in the snow, eyes half closed but always alert. The mountain wind carried faint laughter, not the laughter of men working, but the kind that mocks, sharp and reckless. Ethan straightened, his axe pausing midair. Ranger's head snapped up. From beyond the ridge came the growl of engines, 3 dirt bikes roaring through the snow like wolves off the leash. They tore down the trail, sending sprays of white behind them. The leader, an 18-year-old boy with a red parka and arrogance in his bones, was Cody Thorne, Richard Kane's nephew. His face was sharp, handsome in a careless way, but his eyes carried the cruel confidence of someone who had never been told no. His 2 companions followed, both local kids from Aspen Hollow, Matt Dyer, a tall, nervous boy with acne-scarred cheeks, and Luke Peters, stocky, wide-jawed, and eager to impress. Ethan watched them stop by the fence line, engines idling. He said nothing. Cody revved his bike twice, grinning, then leaned over the handlebars. "Hey, soldier man," he called, voice slicing through the cold. "Nice place you got here. Shame if someone tore it up." Ethan stayed still, the axe hanging loosely in his hand. "Turn around," he said evenly. "You're on private land?" Cody laughed. "Private? You mean Kane's land? My uncle owns everything from here to the ridge. You're just camping on it." Ranger took 2 steps forward, tail stiff, a low growl, vibrating through the air. Cody sneered. "Oh, you brought your mutt." He dismounted, boots crunching in the snow. "You think that thing scares me?" "Don't," Ethan warned, voice cold, flat. "You don't want to do this." But Cody was the kind of boy who mistook patience for weakness. He grabbed a branch from the snowbank, thick, frozen, perfect for swinging, and smirked. "I think I do." The world shrank to a single heartbeat. Ranger moved first, stepping in front of Ethan, his teeth bared, but his posture disciplined. A warning, not an attack. But Cody, emboldened by his friend's laughter, swung the branch. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Ranger yelped, stumbled sideways. The second hit came fast, wild, striking his flank. Ethan shouted, voice breaking the ice. But by then the other two had joined in. Matt half-hesitant, Luke loud and cruel. The snow filled with the sound of panic and violence. When Ethan reached them, it was too late. Ranger lay still, his breath shallow, blood seeping into the snow like spilled ink. The boys backed off, faces pale now, adrenaline turning to fear. "You idiots!" Matt hissed. "Let's go!" They jumped on their bikes, engines shrieking as they fled down the ridge, leaving chaos behind. Ethan dropped to his knees, hands shaking despite the cold. "Ranger," he whispered, pressing a hand against the wound. The dog's eyes fluttered open, glassy but aware. His body trembled under Ethan's touch. "Stay with me," Ethan said, voice hoarse. "You're not done yet." He tore open his vest pouch, pulling out gauze, wrapping it tight around the gash. His movements were steady, surgical. The soldier had returned. Ranger whimpered softly, his paw twitching against Ethan's arm. The snow fell again, light and slow, as if the mountain itself was mourning. Ethan looked up toward the valley, where faint engine noise still echoed, fading into distance. Something inside him went very still, cold, controlled. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was calculating. He carried Ranger back to the truck, the dog's weight heavy against his chest. Every step felt like a vow. Inside the cab, Ethan started the engine, his face expressionless, but his eyes hollowed with resolve. He drove through the winding road toward Havenwood, the next town over, far from Kane's reach. Ranger whimpered once, a sound that tore through the steel casing around Ethan's heart. "Hold on, buddy," he murmured. "We're not done." The clinic sat at the edge of town, a modest building with faded letters reading Rostova Animal Care. The woman inside looked up as he burst through the door. Dr. Ava Rostova was in her 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair pulled into a tight braid. Her face bore the elegant severity of someone who had seen war and learned to live with its ghosts. Deep lines framed her sharp gray eyes, which assessed Ethan in a single glance. The uniform, the dog, the urgency. She didn't ask questions. "Table, now!" she ordered, voice accented faintly Eastern European. Ethan obeyed, laying Ranger on the metal surface. Eva moved with ruthless precision, gloves on, tools prepared, her calm unshaken. "What happened?" she asked. "Assault," Ethan said simply. Her eyes flicked up, studying him. "Men?" "Boys," Ethan said, voice flat. "Rich ones." Her lips pressed thin. "Then you will make them pay." It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched as she injected anesthetic and began to work. Ranger's breathing slowed, then steadied. Blood stained Ava's gloves. Her movements sure, surgical. "You trained him well," she said after a while. "He fights to stay." "So do I," Ethan said quietly. When she finished, her face was pale but composed. "The skull is fractured. I've stopped the bleeding, but the next 12 hours will decide everything. He must stay here." She handed Ethan a small plastic bag. Inside was a metal shard, green automotive paint clinging to its edge. This was embedded deep, not from wood. Ethan turned the shard in his fingers, the color catching the light, the same shade as Cody's dirt bike. His jaw set. "I'll be back in 12 hours, he said. Eva's gaze hardened. "When you come back, bring justice, not guilt." Outside, the snow was falling again, faster now, turning the world to white. Ethan stood beside his truck, staring down the empty road that led back to Frost Valley. Somewhere out there, the boys were laughing, boasting, forgetting, but they had made one mistake. They had hurt the last thing keeping the soldier human. He slipped the metal shard into his vest pocket. The storm was returning, and this time, it wouldn't be weather. The night outside Havenwood fell cold and absolute. A darkness thick enough to swallow breath. Ethan Hale sat in his truck outside Dr. Rostova's clinic, the engine idling low, the heater whispering. His hands rested on the steering wheel, still gloved, the edges of his fingers trembling with a restraint that felt unnatural. Inside, behind frosted glass, Ranger lay under dim light and the rhythmic pulse of machines. Every few seconds, Ethan's eyes flicked toward that window, watching for movement. He didn't pray. Men like him stopped believing in luck long ago, but the silence gnawed at him. 12 hours. That's what Ava had said. He could wait 12 hours, but not idle. He drove back toward Frost Valley, the tires cutting lines through the snow as the storm returned, thicker now, veiling the forest in ghost white. His cabin waited like a shadow beneath the trees. When he stepped inside, the cold clung to him. The silence of the place was different now, not peaceful but hollow, as though it sensed the absence of the dog that had filled it with life. Ethan stood for a moment in the doorway, then moved with quiet purpose. The soldier had taken control. He pulled a rug from beneath the table, revealing the faint metal ring built into the floorboards. With a practiced motion, he hooked his gloved fingers through and lifted. Beneath was a steel hatch, its edges perfectly sealed against the cold. He keyed in a 6-digit code on the recessed panel beside it. The mechanism clicked once and released a hiss of air as the door rose open. Beneath it, darkness waited. His real home, the one built from paranoia, grief, and precision. The narrow staircase descended into what looked like a bunker, walls of reinforced concrete, a generator humming softly in the corner. Weapons racks along one wall, clean, organized, silent. On the far desk sat a computer station surrounded by cables and a satellite uplink dish. Ethan took off his gloves, his fingers pale and scarred, and placed them on the keyboard. He accessed a drive labeled Nomad, a ghost from his past that had refused to stay buried. Files opened across the monitor, operation logs, encrypted communications, and classified documents from their final mission. Ethan's face reflected in the blue glow, eyes hard, unblinking. Operation Nomad had never been an ambush by insurgents. It was an assassination. Someone inside had fed their coordinates to contractors working under a false flag, men who had been paid to erase witnesses. His team had stumbled too close to something they shouldn't have seen. Scrolling through data, he found familiar names, financial transfers routed through offshore accounts, shell corporations linking back to a single entity, Kane Development Holdings. His pulse slowed. It wasn't just about the land. Kane wasn't a local opportunist. He was a pawn. The money trail led higher. He leaned closer as he uncovered another file, encrypted and marked with a familiar code. He entered his old clearance string. The screen flickered, then revealed a government seal, Office of Strategic Operations, Washington, D.C., and one name beneath it, Director Robert Kane, father of Richard Kane. Ethan exhaled, a sound closer to disbelief than surprise. It all fit. A father in the shadows, laundering stolen military technology through his son's company disguised as land development. And those who knew too much, his SEAL team, had been marked for death. He sat back, rubbing his jaw. His beard rasped under his glove as the truth assembled itself into something monstrous. "They didn't just kill my team," he murmured. "They built an empire on their graves." For a long time, Ethan sat still, listening to the hum of electricity. Then he began working. He copied data from the drive onto several encrypted flash drives, duplicates in case one was destroyed. From a storage cabinet, he pulled out a waterproof duffel, slipping one drive into a false lining. He also retrieved a small black satellite phone and typed a single message. "Need eyes. Secure channel. Ghost is awake." The phone buzzed once in reply. The sender's name read Marcus Cole. Marcus had been their communications officer and nomad, quick-witted, sarcastic, but steady under fire. Ethan hadn't heard from him in 2 years, not since both men had vanished off the grid. He'd always suspected Marcus was alive. The man had a knack for surviving bad endings. Minutes later, the phone rang softly. "You're supposed to be dead." Marcus's voice came through, warm but edged with suspicion. "I was," Ethan said. "Then they came after my dog." A pause, then a low whistle. "Bad move on their part." Ethan leaned back, staring at the bunker ceiling. "It's bigger than I thought. Kane's not just buying land. He's running his father's network. Weapons contracts, smuggling, maybe worse. I've got proof, but they'll bury it if I go public." Marcus's tone turned serious. "You sure you want to dig this up again? We barely made it out last time." "They killed everyone else," Ethan said softly. "If I don't finish it, they die for nothing." Static filled the line for a moment. Then Marcus sighed. "All right, I'll help. I've still got contacts in the defense net. But you're radioactive, brother. Anyone caught near you gets burned." "Then burn with me," Ethan said. Marcus chuckled darkly, still poetic even when furious. "Send me what you've got. I'll confirm if the trail's clean." "Done," Ethan replied, attaching the encrypted files. "And Marcus, if I don't make it—" "You'll make it," Marcus cut in. "Because if you don't, I'll have to do paperwork. Stay alive, Ghost." The line went dead. Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the generator a lullaby to ghosts. Then he rose, methodical again, checking each weapon, each magazine. He strapped a sidearm to his thigh, adjusted the brown tactical vest, and reached for a small photograph taped beside the monitor. A picture of his SEAL team, 6 men and a dog in desert sun. He touched it once, then turned away. Outside, the storm howled against the mountains. Snow whipped across the valley like smoke. Ethan climbed the stairs and sealed the hatch behind him. In the dim cabin, he could almost hear Ranger's soft breathing echo from memory. He sat at the window, eyes scanning the tree line. Headlights flickered once, then disappeared. A car idling somewhere down the road. Ethan's pulse steadied. He turned off the lamp, letting the dark embrace him. Whoever it was, they hadn't come for small talk. Far below the ridge, hidden behind a line of pines, a man stepped from the vehicle. His silhouette moved with the easy confidence of training, shoulders broad, movements disciplined. Snow gathered on his dark coat, his breath a faint cloud. He pulled a radio from his pocket. "Target located," he said quietly. "Orders?" Static. Then a reply came, cold and clipped. "Observe only, for now." The man's lips curled in a faint smirk. "Copy that." He looked up toward Ethan's cabin, where one faint ember of light still glowed behind the curtain. Then he vanished into the trees. The hunter had become the hunted. The blizzard had returned with vengeance, sweeping across Frost Valley like a living thing. Snow fell thick and fast, blurring the world into a palette of gray and white. Ethan Hale watched from the cabin window, the faint orange glow of the wood stove casting long shadows over the floor. His body was still, but his mind moved like a machine. He had sent the encrypted evidence to Marcus Cole the night before, and though Marcus confirmed the data trail, there had been no further message. Silence, Ethan knew, was never a good sign. Ranger's absence weighed heavy in the room. Every time the wind howled, Ethan caught himself turning toward the door, expecting the soft thump of paws that never came. The cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. Ethan stood, strapped on his tactical vest, and checked his gear. Pistol, knife, M4 carbine, each cleaned, loaded, and laid out with soldier's precision. He was halfway through reassembling the rifle when movement flickered on the monitor. One of his perimeter cameras, thermal imaging, had gone dark, then another, and another. His hand paused mid-motion. "So it begins," he whispered. Outside in the storm, 8 figures moved through the snow, spread in disciplined formation. They wore white camo suits, night vision goggles, and carried suppressed assault rifles, professionals, not hired muscle. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a shaven head and eyes like winter steel, raised a gloved hand. Call sign Alpha. His real name was Darren Holt, a former private military contractor who'd spent years in deserts and jungles before vanishing into the world of deniable missions. A jagged scar crossed his cheek, a souvenir from a failed extraction years ago when he'd been left behind by his own team. Since then, Holt had turned cold, efficient, loyal only to the paycheck. 2 minutes, Holt said into his mic, voice low but commanding. No radio chatter unless it's blood. Move. The mercenaries advanced with ghost-like silence, the storm muffling their steps. Ethan moved to the center of the cabin, flicked off the lanterns, and touched a switch on the wall. The old wooden floor vibrated faintly, a system he had wired months ago. A tripwire alarm grid linked to motion sensors disguised as broken fence posts. On his small control panel, he saw the dots approaching. He counted 8. No, 9. One larger signal, vehicle-sized, stopped half a mile down the ridge. Backup, he muttered, his eyes hardened. Or insurance. He moved to the back wall, knelt by the stove and pulled it aside to reveal a narrow firing slit built into the logs. The crosshairs of his rifle found the first shape emerging from the storm. A mercenary, crouched low, scanning the field. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger, but he hesitated. He didn't want to start the war yet. He wanted them closer. A metallic click behind him broke the silence. Ethan turned fast, rifle up. Standing in the doorway, soaked in snow and shadows, was Marcus Cole. His face was leaner than Ethan remembered, lined with exhaustion, but his trademark crooked grin remained. "You gonna shoot me, Ghost?" he said dryly. "Or let me in before I freeze my ass off?" Ethan lowered the rifle, relief flickering across his face. "You picked a hell of a time to visit." Marcus stepped inside, shaking snow off his black parka. "Yeah, well, your little email got some attention. I had to burn 3 safe houses to get here." He dropped his pack on the floor, eyes scanning the room. "You got company coming. They're not locals." "I noticed," Ethan said. Marcus crouched beside the stove, his movements smooth, practiced. He was shorter than Ethan, dark-skinned with close-cropped hair and a quick intelligence in his eyes. Years of running, hiding, and hacking had given him a restless energy that never settled. "I traced the signal behind the Mercs," Marcus continued. "Guess who's funding them? Kane Sr.? Big Daddy himself? Your files hurt more than you think. They're panicking. Ethan checked his rifle. Good. Panic makes men stupid. Marcus smirked. Yeah, but stupid men with guns still shoot straight. Outside, one of the mercenaries tripped a line. A flare ignited, bathing the snow in eerie green light. Holt cursed under his breath, waving his team forward. They know we're here. Breach pattern Bravo. 2 men sprinted toward the porch, while others circled to flank the cabin. Ethan exhaled once, slow and calm. Lights out, he said. The generator clicked off. The cabin went black. Only the storm and the flicker of flares lit the world. The first mercenary kicked in the front door. Ethan fired once, clean and precise. The man dropped. Marcus dove behind the kitchen counter, returning fire with a suppressed pistol. Bullets chewed through the wood walls, showering sparks. Remind me why we didn't build this place out of concrete, Marcus shouted. Because I like a view, Ethan replied flatly, switching to his secondary weapon. Another crash came from the back. Holt himself bursting through the side entrance, weapon raised. Ethan ducked behind the staircase, firing short, controlled bursts. Holt rolled behind cover, barked orders into his mic. 3 down, keep pressure. In the chaos, the cabin filled with smoke, snow, and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Marcus pulled a grenade from his vest, smoke, not frag, and tossed it toward the door. The room flooded with white mist. Move, he yelled. Ethan kicked open the side door and slipped out into the storm. Wind tore at his clothes, snow slashing like shards. He moved through it with silent precision, circling the cabin. One mercenary emerged from the tree line. Ethan tackled him into the snow, knife flashing once. Silence. When he looked up, he saw headlights cutting through the fog, a black SUV parked on the ridge. Through his scope, he spotted a silhouette inside. Richard Kane, wrapped in a heavy coat, face lit by the glow of a cigar, watching, waiting. Rage flickered hot behind Ethan's calm exterior. He came to watch his own war. Marcus's voice crackled through the earpiece. Front's clear, back's not. Gunfire erupted again, closer this time. Ethan sprinted toward the cabin, snow spraying underfoot. He vaulted over the railing, landing beside Marcus. Status? 5 left, Marcus replied. And they're getting cocky. Good, Ethan said. Cocky men die loud. The last assault came swift. Holt and his surviving team breached from 2 sides. The firefight turned brutal, close quarters, deafening. Ethan dropped 2 with surgical precision. Marcus took a hit in the shoulder but stayed upright, teeth gritted. Then Holt burst from cover, swinging his rifle like a club. The 2 men crashed into the table, splinters flying. Ethan drove his elbow into Holt's jaw, disarmed him, then pinned him against the wall. Holt grinned through blood. You think you've won? He's already coming for you? Ethan frowned. Who? Holt's eyes gleamed. Not the son, the father. Then his hand twitched toward a hidden blade. Ethan reacted on instinct. 1 motion, 1 strike. The mercenary fell, still smiling. The sudden silence was suffocating. Only the wind screamed through the broken windows. Marcus staggered, blood seeping through his coat. Remind me, he rasped, why we didn't retire somewhere warm. Ethan helped him sit, his expression grim. Because hell keeps finding us. He stepped to the doorway, looking toward the ridge. The SUV was gone, leaving only tire tracks half buried in snow. Kane had seen enough. The war had reached his doorstep, and his father's shadow loomed larger than ever. Ethan turned back inside. We're not done. Marcus gave a weak laugh. No, brother. We've just been invited to the main event. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains. Or maybe it wasn't thunder at all. The morning after the siege came pale and hollow. Smoke coiled from the remains of the cabin, drifting into the bruised sky like the spirit of something that had fought too hard to live. The wind carried the sharp scent of gunpowder and pine sap. Ethan Hale stood among the wreckage, the snow crunching beneath his boots, his breath steaming in the frozen air. His once orderly home now lay in ruin. Shattered windows, bullet holes pocking the logs, scorch marks across the floor. But it wasn't the damage that bothered him. It was the quiet. Marcus Cole sat on the front step, his right shoulder bandaged, face pale but defiant. The man refused to rest. He was still sharp-tongued despite the blood loss. "You ever think about buying insurance, Ghost?" he muttered, his voice hoarse but laced with humor. Ethan gave him a dry look. "Insurance doesn't cover war zones." Marcus huffed out a short laugh and coughed. "Fair. Then maybe you should start charging rent to all the people trying to kill you." Ethan almost smiled but didn't. His eyes drifted toward the ridge where fresh tire tracks cut through the snow. Richard Kane's SUV, long gone. The storm had swallowed his trail, but Ethan knew where it led. East, to Denver, to the real power behind all this. Robert Kane, director of the Office of Strategic Operations, the man who had traded soldiers' lives for contracts and money. The man who had ordered Ethan's team erased. Ranger's absence still ached in his chest like a bruise. He had called Dr. Ava Rostova before dawn. The old woman's voice had been weary but calm. "He's alive," she had said. "Weak, but fighting." That word, fighting, was enough. Ethan clung to it like a prayer. Marcus rose carefully, grimacing as he moved. "You planning on going after them?" Ethan adjusted the strap of his tactical vest, the movement slow, deliberate. "I'm done waiting for their next move." Marcus shook his head. "You're limping toward a hornet's nest, my friend. Kane Sr. isn't just some rich sociopath. He's the architect, the kind who built the whole house with secret exits." Ethan checked his rifle. "Then we burn the exits." Before Marcus could argue, the faint rumble of rotors rolled across the valley. Ethan looked up. A helicopter was approaching low through the clouds, its matte black fuselage marked only by a small silver insignia. It wasn't military. It was private. Ethan's hand went to his weapon, but Marcus raised a hand. "Easy. That's me. I called in a favor." The helicopter landed in a swirl of snow, the side door sliding open to reveal a tall woman stepping out. She was in her early 40s, wearing a dark parka over tactical gear, her auburn hair tied back in a no-nonsense knot. Her face was sharp, angular, the kind that once smiled easily, but hadn't in a long time. Her name was Captain Lara Byrne, a former Air Force intelligence officer Marcus had worked with years ago. She approached with steady confidence, eyes flicking between Ethan and the ruined cabin. "So this is the ghost everyone's whispering about," she said, voice low and even. "You've made quite the mess." Ethan met her gaze. "Cleaning up someone else's." Lara's mouth twitched, half amusement, half approval. "I read your file before they burned it. You should have died 5 years ago." "Working on that," Ethan replied dryly. Marcus smirked. "Told you they'd get along." Lara set down a black case, snapping it open to reveal files, photos, and a sleek tablet. "Here's what I could dig up. Robert Kane's operation runs deeper than either of you thought. He's using federal transport routes to move stolen drone prototypes, Nomad tech, under humanitarian covers. The same program your team stumbled onto before they silenced you." She paused, her gaze flicking to Ethan. He's flying out from Denver tonight, headed to D.C. to wipe the trail completely. Ethan stared at the photos. Robert Kane shaking hands with generals, signing contracts, smiling for cameras. His face was calm, chiseled, clean-shaven, the picture of respectability. The monster always wore a suit. "Then we intercept," Ethan said. Marcus frowned. "Intercept? You mean storm a federal airfield in broad daylight?" Ethan turned toward him, eyes hard but calm. "Not storm, expose." He reached into his vest, pulling out the last flash drive, one he hadn't sent. "I kept a copy, with everything. Coordinates, transfers, communications. We don't need to kill him. We need to make him visible." Lara studied him, then nodded. "You'll need access to the comms hub at the airfield. If you upload from there, the data will bypass government filters, straight to every major outlet in the country. Once it's out, not even the president can bury it." Marcus sighed. "You two are insane." "I like it." Hours later, they reached Denver under gray skies. The airfield sprawled across the frozen plain, lit by sodium lights that flickered like dying stars. Guards patrolled the perimeter, drones circling overhead. Ethan and Lara moved through the shadows, silent and precise. Marcus stayed in the van outside, monitoring the security feed, his voice steady in their earpieces. "Southgate's clear. You've got 3 minutes before shift change." Inside the control tower, the cold glow of screens reflected off steel and glass. Ethan inserted the drive, fingers moving across the console. The progress bar crept forward, 10%, 30%, 70%. Lara covered the door, weapon ready. "You know this won't stop him completely," she murmured. Ethan's voice was quiet. "It's not about stopping him. It's about showing the world what he is." The upload hit 100%. A chime sounded. On monitors across the nation, files began appearing. Names, dates, photos, transaction logs. Within seconds, Kane's empire was laid bare. Then the alarms blared. Outside, black SUVs screeched to a halt. Armed men spilled out, their formation crisp and deadly. Marcus's voice came through, urgent. "Ghost! They're here! Move!" Ethan yanked the drive free. Lara covered him as they sprinted through the service corridor. Gunfire erupted, glass shattering, alarms howling. They burst into the freezing air, bullets cutting through the snow. Marcus swung the van around, side door sliding open. "Get in!" Ethan jumped first, pulling Lara in behind him. Marcus floored the accelerator. The van tore across the tarmac, engines roaring. Behind them, the airfield burned, fuel lines exploding, flames licking at the sky. In the rearview mirror, Ethan caught sight of a helicopter lifting off. Sleek, government-marked, heading east. Through the glass, he glimpsed the face of Robert Kane himself, expressionless, composed even as the world he built burned. Their eyes met for a heartbeat across the chaos. Then the helicopter vanished into the clouds. The van sped toward the mountains. Hours later, dawn bled over the horizon. They stopped by a frozen lake outside the city. The world was quiet again, soft and white. Marcus leaned against the van, arm in a sling, shaking his head. "Well, Ghost, you did it. You just declared war on half of Washington." Ethan looked toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Not war, just truth." Lara handed him a small earpiece. "Media's running the files. Kane's name is everywhere. He'll go to ground, but he's finished publicly." She smiled faintly. "You're free now, if that word still means anything." Ethan turned to the van, opening the door. Inside, wrapped in a thick blanket, lay Ranger, weak, scarred, but alive. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes finding Ethan's. Ethan knelt, resting his hand on the dog's neck. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. "It's over." Ranger licked his glove, tail thumping once against the seat. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and ash. The first true light of morning spilled across the lake. Ethan stood beside Lara and Marcus, watching as the sun rose over the mountains. The fight was done, for now. But as the warmth touched his face, he knew peace wasn't a place. It was a choice. One he'd keep making, day after day, for as long as breath remained. And far above them, somewhere beyond the clouds, a single helicopter cut through the dawn, its pilot silent, its destination unknown. When the war ends, sometimes all that's left is silence. And in that silence, God whispers. He reminds us that miracles don't always roar. Sometimes they breathe quietly through the loyalty of a friend, the warmth of a dog's heartbeat, or the courage to forgive. Ethan's story isn't just about fighting evil. It's about finding grace again after losing faith. Maybe tonight, as you watch this, remember that even in your darkest valleys, God is still working. He never leaves you, not even when the world does. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about your own miracle, and subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption. May God bless you, your family, and all those still fighting their unseen battles.